Okay, let's continue with our notes. Here we're going to remind you of the product property of square roots, which we learned about last class. The square root of the product equals the product of square roots. We use this to help us simplify radicals, but now we're going to use this to help us multiply radicals together. So if we want to multiply radicals together, the first thing we want to do is we want to multiply the numbers in front of the radicals. So anything in front gets multiplied with anything in front. Then we're going to multiply the numbers under the radical. So anything under gets multiplied with anything under. And then lastly, we're going to simplify the square root by taking out all the perfect square factors like how we practiced last class. Let's look at some examples. Our first example, we have the square root of 3 times the square root of 8. Technically, in front of this square root is really a 1, and in front of this square root is really a 1. So if we multiply those two together, it would still be 1, but I don't really need to write the number 1. So now let's multiply the numbers underneath the radicals together. So 3 times 8 is going to give us the square root of 24. Now that we multiplied them, now I need to simplify this square root of 24. Well, 24 is not a perfect square, but there is a perfect square factor inside of 24. So we could just look to see what is the biggest perfect square factor, or we could do the factor tree, and that's up to you to decide however you like to do it better. I'm going to remind you of how to do the factor tree on this one. So in this one, I know that 24 is even, so I can break this up to be 2 and 12. Then 12 I know can be 2 times 6, and then 6 can be broken up to 2 times 3. Now remember, we're looking for pairs. So I see that these 2's make a pair, and then this 2 and 3 do not have any pairs, so they're going to stay separate. All right, so let's simplify. This becomes the square root. Let's put these two together because they make a pair, 2 times 2. And then in a different square root, let's put the other factors, 2 times 3. So now let's multiply these together. My pair, 2 times 2, creates the square root of 4. And then in the other square root, 2 times 3 gives me the square root of 6. So if you had seen in the beginning that the biggest perfect square factor of 24 was 4, then you could have skipped this factor tree and just split it up right away to be 4 times 6. All right, our last step is now we're going to take the square root of 4 because it's a perfect square, so that becomes 2, and then the square root of 6 stays underneath the radical, and that becomes our answer, 2 square root of 6. Okay, let's look at another example. We have the square root of 5 times 6, the square root of 15. Now remember what we said, technically there's really a 1 in front of this first square root. So when I said before we're going to multiply the outside numbers together in front of the radical with in front of the radical, 6 times 1 gives me 6. Now let's multiply the numbers underneath the radical. 5 times 15, that's going to give me 75. Okay, now let's simplify this 75. 75 is not a perfect square, but it does have a perfect square factor. Now right away, I see it's going to be 25. So I'm going to split this up from the beginning without doing the factor tree, and I'm going to make this 25 and 3. If I multiplied 25 and 3 back together, it would give me back 75. Okay, now let's take the square root of 25. I get 6 times the square root of 25 is 5, and we still have this square root of 3. Finally, let's multiply these outside numbers together. 6 times 5 gives me 30 square root of 3, and that would be our answer for this one. Let's look at 2 more. We're going to do number 3. Okay, at number 3, I'm going to have 4 square root of 2 times 5 square root of 24. All right, let's simplify here. We're going to multiply the numbers in front with the number in front. So the 4 and the 5, they get multiplied together. 4 times 5 gives me 20. And now let's multiply the numbers underneath the radical here. 2 times 24 gives me 48. So when I multiply, I get 20 square root of 48. Now I need to simplify. I'm gonna look for the biggest perfect square factor inside of 48, or I can do the factor tree. I'm gonna do the factor tree for this one because this is one that people commonly make a mistake on. The biggest perfect square factor is not 4. So let's see what happens. We're gonna do the factor tree. I'm gonna get 2 times 24. Let's break down the 24 to be 2 and 12. The 12 is 2 times 6, and then the 6 is 2 times 3. Let's look for pairs. I have these 2's, they create a pair, and these 2's also create a pair. This 3 is the only thing that's left over. So let's put the pairs in their own perfect square, in their own square root. The 20 is just gonna hang out in front. Under the first square root, let's put this pair, 2 times 2, and we'll put the second pair, 2 times 2. In its own square root, let's put the number that's left over, which is the 3. Okay, let's multiply the pairs together. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, which means that 16 is the biggest perfect square factor of 48. So if you saw that from the beginning, you could have broken up 48 to be 16 times 3 from the start, but if you didn't see that it was 16, then doing this factor tree helps. Okay, let's keep simplifying. I'm gonna take the square root of 16 because now 16 is a perfect square. Now I have 20 times 4, and I still have this square root of 3 over here. Finally, let's multiply the 20 and the 4 together. 20 times 4 is gonna be 80. Square root of 3 is going to be my answer for this one. Okay, let's do one more, just so make sure we have the hang of it. We're gonna look at 2 square root of 4 times square root of 20. Okay, first we're gonna multiply the numbers. Remember, the in front number goes with the in front number. We have a 2 in front of the first one and a 1 in front of the second one. So we can multiply those together. 2 times 1 is gonna give me 2. Let's multiply the numbers underneath the radical. 4 times 20, and that's gonna give me 80. Now let's look for the biggest perfect square factor inside of 80. Well, right away I see 4 is a perfect square, and that 4, it came from this first radical. But 4 times 20, look inside of the 20. Do you see there's another 4 inside of 20? Now let's put those 4's together. 4 times 4, that would give me 16. 16 is the biggest perfect square that goes into 80, and it goes into 85 times. If I multiply these two back together, 16 times 5 would give me back 80. Let's take the square root of 16. I get 2 times 4 times radical 5. Finally, multiply these numbers in front. 2 times 4 is 8, radical 5. That would be our answer.